research is entitled Fanny's on the Big Screen, the adaptation of Fanny Price for the modern day audience. So my research looks at the way Fanny Price is portrayed in the 1999 and 2007 film adaptations of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. Specifically within it, I am arguing that instead of creating a visual vocabulary, these two adaptations of Mansfield Park adapt the character Fanny and her moral integrity to appeal to modern day audiences, and ultimately that compromises the way that modern day audiences understand the novel. So, in first looking at my research, the first thing that you have to understand is how to analyze adapted films. And you can't look at them as being loyal to their original novel, because as Linda Hutchins states, adaptations are second without being secondary, which means that even though that they are drawing from a already created source, they are their own autonomous pieces of work. So you can't compare them solely on what they changed from the novel. And there are three different types of adaptations. There's a literal translation, which is trying to portray exactly what's from the source. There's a commentary, or which is basically a critique of the source. And then there's a transformation or a reinterpretation of the source, which is, for example, taking Jane Austen's novel Emma and turning it into Clueless. It's two very different pieces, but it is the same storyline. Also, in addition to adaptation theory, I'm pulling from Cheryl Nixon's idea of visual vocabulary versus creative liberties. So Cheryl Nixon states a visual vocabulary is something that maintains the thematic thrust of the plot, but gives a visual vocabulary of the text, which means they take what's already in the text and just translate that into whatever a film can create to represent what's in the text. So to give a better understanding of what a visual vocabulary is, there are two famous adaptations of Jane Austen novels, one being the 1995 Pride and Prejudice and the 1995 Sense and Sensibility. The 1995 Pride and Prejudice does a better job of creating a visual vocabulary, specifically with the main hero, Darcy, which many girls are very aware of. In the novel, he is a very brooding character with a lot of emotion, but the audience doesn't really have that much access to it. So the film does its best to draw out that emotion from Darcy. You see that when the camera has very long close-ups of him looking out the window, or the famous Wet Darcy scene where he takes off his shirt and jumps into a lake. Now, obviously that is not in the Jane Austen novel, but it is a representation of an emotional cleansing. It's him releasing all of the things that are holding him back from truly loving Elizabeth. And so the novel is taking what's already in the text and just giving it a vocabulary for what they can do in the film. In contrast, Sense and Sensibility strays from creating a visual vocabulary and goes more into the space of creative liberties, simply because in the novel, Jane Austen is emphasizing this idea of sense, and the older sister Eleanor has this sense. She is reserved, she thinks a lot about every single one of her actions, and methodically plans out things. Other than her sister Marianne, who is whimsical and outgoing and decides to run in the rain and is pretty careless. And so in the novel, Austen really emphasizes Eleanor's sense. However, in the movie, to appeal to our values as modern day people, they actually emphasize Eleanor's sensibility and kind of condemn Eleanor's sense to make her seem like she needs to be more whimsical. And so in changing the overall moral, you're actually taking creative liberties rather than giving a visual vocabulary to the text. So specifically gearing this towards Mansfield Park, you have to understand the appeal of Austen adaptations, and a large reason for this is a nostalgia for the past. People love the idea of simpler times, knowing exactly where you fit in society. However, people also like the Austen heroines and the Austen heroes. They like the females who, even though they're in these strong constructs of what you should be as a female, they push those boundaries. They speak up against authority and they challenge their male counterparts. And the heroes women generally love because they're the classic gentlemen. However, when you get to the novel Mansfield Park, which I'm studying, the main character, Fanny Price, is said to appeal less than any of Austen's heroines because she's not the typical Austen heroine. The typical Austen heroine is outspoken, independent, she challenges her male counterparts, she's strong and she's active. However, Fanny Price is very opposite from this. She's timid, she is physically weak, she doesn't speak her mind, she has a very low self-esteem, and she's somewhat of a pushover, which many people don't really like, and it doesn't appeal to them. So, specifically looking at my research, I hope to understand the ways in which these films change Fanny to appeal to our modern day audiences, since she's nothing like the typical Austen heroine. I will do this by looking at the way she's described in the novel and the way that she interacts with other characters. Also, I'll be looking at the interiority of the novel versus the film, as just looking into Fanny's head, why she makes the decisions she does, what are her motivations. And also, finally, I'm looking at her rejection of Henry Crawford in the novel versus the way she rejects him in the film. And I think this will all lead me to a much larger question of, is it possible to have a female who is the moral integrity of the novel and have that adaptation be successful in Hollywood? Now, speaking more of this moral pillar, that is Fanny's role in this novel, which is actually why she's highly disliked. She exemplifies only morality. She actually has very little character arc. She is calm and complacent and quiet in the very beginning of the novel, and she exists that way throughout the entirety of the novel. These different quotes kind of describe her, and that she is unamused, she sits and looks and listens, she is constantly passive, she only follows moral rules, and she's charmless. About 90% of the novel consists of her sitting in a corner quietly watching other people, and the other 10% is about her crying. So she really does not have that interesting of a character as much as the other Austen heroines. Even furthering this, MacIntyre refers to Fanny as the last great representative of the classical tradition of virtues. So she represents the ideal woman who is quiet, she sits in the corner, she watches from afar, she does not try to partake in the conversations that the men have. She is simply to look there and be pretty. But Fanny doesn't have as high of a stature, so she doesn't even have a place to speak. It's stated in this quote that I really love that she has a heroism of principle. She wants to do her duty, and she has good resolutions on the side of self-government, and those are things that she adheres to throughout the entire novel. And so I want to look specifically about how they portray her in these two films. Because of her character in the novel, it doesn't attract many viewers, it doesn't attract many readers. It's actually Austen's most unpopular book. And so in looking at these two film adaptations, the 1999 adaptation is a critique of Mansfield Park. However, it is not a critique of Fanny. It's actually a critique of the economics behind the setting, which is Mansfield Park. That film wants to shed light on the fact that the family gets its comfort and its well-being and its stature from slavery on different countries. And so it wants to bring that to light, but in bringing that out, they actually highly adapt Fanny. They make her physically active, which in the novel, she can barely walk for 20 minutes without being out of breath. In this movie, she's running around, she's screaming, she's riding horses. And so they completely overhaul her character to help emphasize that critique. And in the 2007 version, which is supposed to be a historical depiction, trying to be as close to the novel as possible, they oversimplify Fanny. They make her character just seem sweet, and they do accurately say that she is moral, but they don't actually show what's going on in her head. That shows a lot more depth to Fanny. And so, in looking at the two ways that you change Fanny, I think that in actuality, they're taking a little bit of creative liberties. Because if she is the moral pillar of the novel, and if the moral that you're supposed to take away from the novel is embodied in Fanny, then changing her in any way actually corrupts the way in which we understand the novel. I remember the reason why I became interested in this project is because I watched the film first, and I loved her. And then I read the book, and I was so angry because she was nothing like what the films depicted. And so that's something that really drives my research, and in the future, I really want to analyze Fanny more, and I want to analyze the way she's changed in these films to see if you can actually make an accurate representation of her that would keep the moral of the story as well as be interesting to an audience. And finally, I would like to thank my advisor, the coordinators at Whittier College, and my Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship for allowing me to conduct this research.
Thank you.